Sweet. React hooks. I'm really excited to talk about React hooks because I've been excited to talk about it every morning that I've woken up for the last month, or since they released it. It actually pushed me to start live streaming and being really loud and obnoxious on the internet. Hooks, hooks, hooks. I just push it on everybody now. And yeah, all my stuff's running hooks in production now. You're supposed to be like, no. So I'm Tanner. I am there. So if you want to talk to me there, come find me there. My name is my tag, my username, whatever, on the internet. So I'm actually holding a fish in that picture that you can't see, but I'm a skilled fisherman too. I run a startup with some other co-founders called Nozzle. We try to know everything about the internet and provide that information to our clients. Right now, it's mostly analytics about Google and rankings and where companies rank for certain keywords. So, who here is at least familiar or heard of hooks? Raise your hand. Who has experimented with hooks? Raise your hand. Who is using hooks right now? Okay, no one. Okay, that's all right. That's probably a good thing because hooks are they're not experimental, they're alpha right now. I would say it's pretty much set in stone. Hooks are where React is going. But they're not telling you to use them yet. They're still ironing out some things. So why should we be using hooks? These are the questions that I want to answer because I know that there's some people who are extremely jaded about hooks. They're like, okay, I've been using classes forever and classes work great. I'm not going to refactor my app. I don't need hooks. Well, you would basically be stomping on your future because that's where things are going. I don't work for Facebook. I don't know for sure, but I know that in a year or two, your little class thingies are going to be gone. And if you want to use them, you can import a little helper. It's kind of reminiscent of maybe create class. Anybody remember that? Yeah, that's where your classes are going to be. So why do we need hooks? Time. Time complicates everything. If you've written a stateless functional component, you're like, wow, this is so simple. If that component needs to change over time or adapt to changes over time, this is what complicates everything at the root of React. It's how does your app change over time? One of those things is extremely visible in the way that you write your React code right now. You've got component did mount, did update, and will unmount. These are your holy grail life cycles. You don't want to let go of them because they're your bread and butter. I understand that, but it's time to maybe it's time to have a DTR with these lifecycle methods. But these are all about time, right? It's timing. When did I just mount? I'm updating over time. How do I handle changes? Ingest certain props. How do I handle state? Time complicates everything. And so this is actually a class component that actually I can't even remember where I got it. It's actually part of a video. But if you look at the pieces of logic in this class, the ones that we can see, and if you were to highlight them with kind of what are they doing? What are their responsibilities? All these blue parts are related. You know, there's some blue state for that state. There's this blue part right here is like an event handler. Down here is another kind of event handler, and then you've got purple, which is a completely different feature within this component. But you can see how everything's kind of intertwined, right? And it makes reasoning about your app or your little component extremely difficult. And you don't know that yet because this is all we've known. You don't know what you don't know. And when I saw this, I was like, well, this works fine. I'm good to go. But somebody made this animation and I love it. But what if you could take all this stuff that's disparate and unorganized, co-locate it into blocks of features and have the same functionality, right? So this is actually a real component that somebody took and color-coded to show where the code went. And I wonder if I can play that again. You can see where all the code goes. They turn into these big giant blocks. These 3 blocks right here are actually outside of the component, which is really cool. We're going to get to why that's important. But you can see how now everything that has to do with, let's see, this top portion is like some state for a value and changing that value and updating that value. It's all there. This yellow one updates the title. It's all in that one little block. And this purple one is somehow it's getting the window width. It's subscribing to the width of your viewport, right? Before, all this stuff was just scattered all over the place, and now it's in these nice little blocks. And at the bottom here, that's where you're using that logic. So co-located logic is just the beginning of why hooks are going to help you think more clearly about the structure of your components. Before, these lifecycle methods were technically hooks in and of themselves, and in most ways they used hooks under the hood and we didn't even know it. Co-located logic opens up a lot of possibilities. So some of the things that this co-located logic and this hook system fix are, who's used render props? Basically everybody should raise their hand, because render props are everywhere in the ecosystem. Higher order components came before render props. Does anybody really love higher order components? Anybody? I despise them. And then there's compose. You're composing all these props and these components together. This is a great example of where render props have gotten us. These are components that don't render anything, but they just give us something in the child as a function, and we use it. Anybody have this in their code right now, anywhere? Yeah, it's really annoying, and it gets really deep and really nested. Anybody using React Router, which is probably 80% of the room, has this to some extent in their code. Well, all of those patterns, all of the things that the ecosystem has come up with to solve that problem, render props, HOCs, all of those are going to go away. And it's going to become just hooks. That is a bold statement, I know. But I guarantee you that's where it's going. It's going to become just a function that you import and you use it anywhere you want. Because it's just JavaScript. That's where React has been going forever. That's where it's going now. Instead of being JSX with all this nesting hell, as they said in a lot of the talks that they had announcing it, getting rid of that is great. So this turns into this. So having reusable logic in your components no longer requires a component. If you need 3 different states, then you can just have 3 different states. You don't have to nest anything at all. So not only does it clean up your code, but it also makes things much more reusable. Since these hooks right here, they're just functions. That's the beautiful part about it. So if this doesn't have you eyeing hooks now, just those were the first things that were attractive to me, right? But there's way more where that comes from, okay? So classes go away, and it's just functions. And this is really uncomfortable at the beginning. Very uncomfortable, because classes have kind of been the staple of React. If you want to do anything with state or lifecycle, really, if you want to do any real work in a component, you have to have classes. That going away, you're going to think, okay, well, how do I do X with hooks? How do I do this with hooks? How do I manage, what happens to this dot if you needed to handle something like that? And when I realized that there were no more classes for me, and it was all just functions. I had an epiphany that all of my code in Nozzle, who I work for, all my open source projects, I'm not going to have to handle classes anymore. That does a lot for my code. Mostly it helps me have better memoization. Is anybody unfamiliar with memoization? So memoization is a form of caching. It's a form of change detection. It helps your apps run a lot faster. Up until this point, it hasn't really been present in the core of React. If you wanted to do any memoization, the most memoization that happened was at the component level when props come into a component, and if the props change, then the component re-renders if you're using pure component. That's kind of the best form of memoization that React's had up to this point. You could do your own memoization if you wanted, but memoization is going to become a big part of React apps after hooks come in. And I'm going to show some of that today too. So the best way to understand how hooks are going to change everything is just to dive right in. There's a useState hook, which replaces this .setState. I'm being very terse here. There's a lot to these hooks and APIs that I'm not going to shove in your face right now. But basically, it replaces this .setState. UseEffect is going to replace your did mount, did update, will unmount, and it also allows you to do a lot of cool change detection too. Use context is great because if you want to use any context, you don't have to write that myContext.consumer, get the child as a function, and go through this ritual to get that value. And you also won't even need to use the static context type that they just barely added. Use reducer. So I was going to say something there. Maybe I'll come back to it. But use reducer is really neat. Use memo and use callback. So it's funny, memoization wasn't really in the vocabulary of React before hooks, but now there's a hook called use memo. Really powerful. I'm going to show you guys why. Use callback is very related to use memo. They do change detection. Very powerful, very cool. Use ref. If you ever attached anything to this dot whatever on your class, use ref as your friend. It's your new this dot. There's these two hooks that are a little more advanced and not necessary for today's talk. You can go check them out if you want. They're useful for some advanced situations, but we're not going to talk about them today. Let's do some code before I show you that. Let's see. All right. Let's get rid of that. Pump it up. Can everybody see that? We good to go? All right. So hooks are alpha right now, which means if you want to use them, you have to import React 16.7.0.alpha or -alpha. And that's okay because we're just experimenting. You have to do it for both React and React DOM. Once that's done, you can experiment with hooks all you want. So I'm actually going to go through some pretty contrived and useless examples for things that we would build in the real world, but they help illustrate what hooks are actually used for. And I wanted to show you how to convert a class over to hooks. I think that's easy to get lost in, so we're just going to go straight from the ground up with hooks. The first thing I want to build is a counter, because that is the hello world of state, right? So the first thing we need to do is bring in useState from React. And let's see, we're going to do that up here. Let's bring this stuff up. So useState, actually I have the docs open over here. This is the hooks API reference from React. You should read this all the way through. It's so well done. I felt after I read this that I was an expert. That's obviously not true, but at least it made you confident, right? So useState is the first basic hook. I don't know why they call it basic, but it's the first basic hook, and this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to copy that out, pop it right here. So it takes some initial state, it gives us that state, and gives us a setter. This initial state could be anything. It could be an object like we're used to with this dot state, or it could just be any value. I'm just going to start it at 0 because I count up from 0. State, we'll just call this count, and this is going to be set count. So since this is coming out of an array, we can call these variables whatever we want. And that's actually really useful because we can have multiples of these if we want, which is something you couldn't do before with classes. You couldn't have more than one state instance, really. It was just this dot state. And if you had multiple concerns in that state, you would nest them under keys. Well, now you can have as many state instances as you want. So you can name them appropriately. This is our count, so I'm going to name the value as count and the setter as set.count, or set count. And let's get rid of this garbage hello world here. And let's just return the count. And I don't know why I had to reload there. Sweet. Wow. That's awesome. Let's name it count. Let's do count right there. Let's put that in its own div really quick. And let's give it a button that increments the count. Let's see, this is a button. Live coding is so hard. Please don't laugh at me. Thanks. And when they click this button, we're going to call set count. Now the thing with use state in hooks is there's no more of this. If you say like just set count 1 or 2, you can do that, but it replaces the entire state. If you want to change pieces of it, you have to use a functional callback. It gives you the old value and you return the new value. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the old value and we're going to return old plus 1. I really want, there we go. And why is it not hot reloading? That's really annoying. Hold on to your pants. All right, is this working? Yes, thank you. All right. Woo! Sweet. So this dot state and this dot set state are now gone. You don't even need to worry about using them anymore. And this is still just a function, which is really great. If we wanted to, we could make a complex state object with count, 0, and we could update it with, function right here, take the old one. But I actually like this little pattern, like pieces of state having their own setters and variables. It's really nice. Let's make a toggle, which shouldn't be that difficult. We can actually just take this and say on. We'll call this set toggle, and we'll set it to false. So let's see, we got the counter. We're doing the toggle. Let's just copy all this stuff, and we'll say toggle on set toggle, and we're just gonna do the opposite right here. So toggle, on toString. That's a Boolean. Okay, sweet. All right, this is pretty basic and honestly not very exciting. So let's start using something a little more exciting. If you ever wanted to know when the user scrolls in your component, that's something that's like scrolling is difficult to manage a lot of the time. You got to set up event listeners on the document, stuff like that. Let's do that. To do that, we're going to use an effect. Now remember, effect is let's see, use effect. Use effect is for mutations, subscriptions, timers, logging, and other side effects that are not allowed inside the main body of a function component. This is basically what's replacing component did mount, will update, did update, and will unmount. But it can do so much more than that, I promise you. Let's use effect, and we're just gonna like log some stuff really quick. Use effect takes a function where if we just give it this raw function right here, and we just say hello, use effect will, in this form right here, will run after every render. After every time this component updates, it's gonna run this function. So you see it logged hello. If we increment the count, it keeps logging hello. If we toggle this, it logs hello. Anytime the component updates, it's running this effect. That's pretty cool. In here, why don't we subscribe to, let's see, document dot add event listener, scroll, and let's do on scroll. Let's make an on scroll function, and let's just log, let's see, console log date now. Okay, so this isn't going to scroll yet, so why don't we do this? Height is 120 view height. I must have broken hot reloading. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so you see it's logging the time now. That's because after the component mounted for the first time, it added this event listener and it's running this function. But see, the problem is every time that the component updates, we're adding a new event listener. So now we have 4 times the event listeners that we need. So what we need to do in this effect is teach this effect how to unwind what we did in it. And to do that, you return a function that just kind of cleans up. It's a cleanup function. All we're going to do is we're going to say document remove event listener on scroll. So now we'll only have one of those event listeners listening at one time. So every time the component updates, the very first time, there's nothing to clean up, so it won't run this, but it's going to add our event listener. And then when we hit increment, it says, oh, I updated. First I'm going to unwind the last effect, so it removes the listener, and then it adds it back again. You might think that that's expensive or hard for the DOM to do, but it's not. It's actually really fast. So we have a scroller. It's listening to our scroll position now, or it should be. I think I keep breaking code sandbox. There we go. Still working. Okay, so there's a scroller. Now what we could do is right now this is running after every single time we render the component. And that works great. But what if we only wanted to run it the first time the component mounted and then right before it unmounts? Well, this is kind of weird, but you can actually pass an empty array. The second parameter here is the change detection of this effect. So whenever these things change, it's going to rerun. Well, this is kind of a weird syntax. I don't know if this is going to stick around, but basically by passing an empty array, we're telling it that nothing's ever going to change. So just run it the first time when it mounts, and then run it again when it unmounts. Basically, this is component did mount and will unmount. I hate calling it that because people are going to still think in life cycles, but that's essentially what this is doing. What we could do is make it so that it's only listening to our scroll when the toggle is on. So we're going to take this on value from our toggle and we're going to put it right here. So now, anytime that on changes, it's going to rerun our effect. And right here, all we would need to do is say if on, add the listener. So right now, there's nothing. If we toggle this on, it's listening to the scroll. If we toggle it off, it's not listening anymore. I just realized that that still says increment. That's wrong. Does that make sense? Everybody following up till now? It's really contrived, but I hope you can see how useful these effects are. Effects are extremely fun. So this effect used to run on every single render. Now it only happens when on changes. That's really cool. Only running code when we need to is great. Let's do some context. Let's do deep count. This deep count function. We're just going to take this counter logic right here. We're going to put it into this deep count right here. Let's see. I love prettier. So with context, if you're not familiar with context, it's a way to pass data down through the React tree without actually passing it through props each time. If you had to pass everything down through props would get really big and really messy. Context is a way to just kind of send it down the tree, and then something else can pick it back up anywhere along the tree. And this right here, first we need a context to do that. So let's say count context equals React create context, and we're going to initialize it with nothing. And then right here, let's see, first in our app we need to send the context down the chain. And the best way to do that is just wrap the whole thing in the provider of that context. And let's move this down here. And then we're going to pass it the value, and we're going to have it be, let's see, we're going to pass the count and the set count. And that means that we can pick those values up anywhere down the line if we subscribe to that context. So in this deep count up here, we can, let's see, we can say const count set count equals, we're going to use a new hook here, use context. And then you just pass the context that you want to subscribe to. So instead of doing that whole consumer child as a function thing getting the value, you can just do it inline right here. And then we can take this deep count right here, and let's just put this right here. Just render deep count. I have to reload. I don't know why. So this is see, we're not passing the count or the set count to this component, but it's subscribing to it through context, and it can actually increment just as well, and it gets the count too. Context is really cool. That's actually how Redux works. That's how theming works. A lot of cool things run on context. And now you can just use it as a hook. So actually this deep count, we don't even need to call it deep count. We can just say count. And we could render as many counts as we want, really. We could do 2 or 3 of them right here. It's not deep count anymore though. And they're all subscribed to that initial context. Very cool. All right, how am I doing on time? I'm trying to be quick here. So the timer, I don't think we have time to do a timer. That's kind of ironic. Sorry, dad joke. But I'll show you how to use like a custom hook. So this effect of like listening to the scroll, we could take this effect, and right now this is local to our component, but what if we wanted to listen to the scroll in any other component in our app, and we wanted to share this logic? Well, we could take this use effect, and let's just rip it out, and let's put it into its own function up here. We'll call it function use scroll. Use on scroll. And we're going to do it inside of here. So let's see, we don't have on, so we're going to make them pass us on whether we should be listening or not. And then we're also going to pass a callback, and when it on scrolls, we're just going to call, let's see, let's take this out, and we're just going to call the callback with the event. So now we could use this anywhere we want. Use on scroll. Let's go back into our component here, and let's say use on scroll. Let's pass it on, and then it'll give us the event back when it runs, and we'll log the date. Reload. So not listening, toggle it on, listening. Very cool. So that's how you can reuse hooks. Before, if you wanted to reuse that logic, you would have had to make either a render prop component or a higher order component or something that results in wrapping your code however many times it takes to use that logic. And also, if it needed state, it would have had to be its own class with this.state. We can use any hook we want inside of here, state, context, whatever, and it will just use whatever component it's being rendered in. So use on scroll is going to call this effect whenever the component that it's being used in re-renders and when on changes. Really cool, is very reusable. Does anybody have any questions about that? This seems to be like the weirdest part of hooks for people is effects and custom hooks. Any questions? Yeah.
Functions also take like the value of like first item of that array. Like does it take like a value or a function, or it takes a function like the function?
Use state?
Yes.
Are you talking about the set state part of it?
Yes.
Okay, so let's set count.
So I can on click you have to like set toggle old, like that's a function that it takes. Can it take the value?
It can take the value, but let me tell you why that's kind of a bad idea.
Okay.
So since React is moving asynchronous, right? You don't know what the old value is all the time. If we just said not old and took it from this value up here, we could be using a stale version of the old variable. So that's why you give it a function that just says, okay, anything that I'm using in the current state that I'm going to change, I'm going to make sure that I have the most up-to-date version of it that I then pass over. But yes, you can just replace the state if you want atomically. So if this didn't rely on any of the old state, you could just say true. It doesn't rely on any old state. It's always going to be true. So you can just set it like that. Honestly, even in that situation, I'm still trying to decide if I would do this. It seems kind of weird. But I might. Who knows? Any other questions before we go on to the next thing? Are you sure?
This is kind of backpedaling a little bit, but with your use state hook, are we able to set multiple pieces of state using one instance of it, or do we have to use separate instances every time?
However you want.
Could you show us how to do that?
Sure. So what if we had some deep state and we just put our count in there like this, and this was just our state and this is set state. Look familiar?
Yeah.
Right. This is what people are used to. In fact, if you're converting a class over, this is kind of a nice way to do it. You get the state, right? So now instead of that being just a value, you get count. And then this set state right here would just be, let's see, set state, right? And we could just send through the entire state actually. So let's do that. This is a really good question. So we got the state, we got set state. We can put it down through count. So right here, this is going to be the state, and this is going to be set state. And so right here, we could just destructure out of state the count. Put that count in there. And then right here on this set state, it would just be the old, and we could do this, return a new object with count, and it would be old.count plus 1. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Then it becomes just like you're used to, right? But it's the same thing. As long as you're using functional set state, you'll get into trouble if you try replacing the whole state, because unlike this .set state, where you could update just parts of it. Like if you only passed one property, it would kind of append it to the rest of the state. This is not like that. So if we had some other state on there, like toggle true, but we didn't pass it when we updated it, it replaces the whole state with just this. And so you can't just upsert, I guess is the right term, into the state anymore. That's going to be difficult for some people, but in the end, it's going to be better for you, I promise.
Is there any React memorization of these key the state values? Are these optimized by the React reconciler, or is memorization or whatnot something you can add on top?
You'd have to add it on top of this. Technically, we're not doing any memoization right now. We're doing some change detection on that event right here. We're only running when on changes. Memoization is interesting because with hooks, there is no more should component update for performance. And that's where memoization really comes in. Memoization is hard to demonstrate in a contrived example, but basically we could do this. We could say, this is some expensive stuff right here. And then we can call use memo. And we can do that expensive stuff. Like, say we're returning a table, some table component. Maybe it's React table. That's really expensive to compute, right? And we only want to update that table when something changes. You pass say we want to only update it when on changes, just like we're doing with the scroll listener. So this function right here would only run when on changes. So the first time it would run and it would return the table, we could take this expensive stuff and we could put it right here. Expensive stuff. In fact, we could just do this. Hello, div. So that expensive stuff is going to render. It's going to say hello. Use memo is not defined because I didn't import it. Sweet. Why is it so short? Okay, so it's hello. So if I'm incrementing this count right here, that hello is not re-rendering. It's not recalculating because it's being memoized right here. So on is still the same. Even when I increment the count, it's still false. So hello is not updating at all. It's not even running this function at all. But as soon as on changes, it's updating that hello component. It's not changing, right? In fact, let's do this. Let's do date.now. This will be easy. So you'll see when I'm hitting this count, it's not updating, but when I toggle, it's updating the time. So that's how you do should component update. That was an excellent question, whoever asked it. So kind of contrived, but really useful. You can memoize on as many things as you want here. You could put as many things in here, but it uses triple equals comparisons, right? So if the old one does not triple equal the new one, it will run that function. What was that? It does not do a deep diff, but you could technically write your own hook to do a deep diff. You could just pass your own stuff here. You could say deep object, and then instead of use memo, it's like use deep diff or use deep memo. You go write your function that instead of using the normal use memo, just you're comparing old value to new one and updating on your own. That's the beauty of use hooks. You can actually replace them with your own.
So is state maintained and reconciled in its own fiber completely outside of the reconciliation exit? I don't look at that.
Right. So think about it this way. People are like, okay, well, if we're using multiple states here, where do those states live? Well, even though it's function, it's just a function component in React, it still has an instance under the hood, a fiber, right? And that fiber just has a bunch of slots. that any of these hooks can subscribe to. So the very first time it runs this useState is basically leasing a slot on that fiber, right? And since it's the first one in, it gets the first slot. And then it does its stuff and it can store stuff there. And then this useState comes in and it says, oh, I need a slot too. Lease me a slot fiber. And so it comes in underneath it right here. That's why the order of your hooks have to be consistent. And you can't put them conditionally, right? Because if one of them renders sometimes, then one slot might use another slot's memory. Everything blows up. And people are like, oh, I hate it that you have to use consistent ordering on your hooks. Guess what? That's programming. Your code has to be in the right order. You know? And if you're putting hooks and state and conditionals, it's probably a design pattern that could be improved, in my opinion. So moving on, I think I had one last thing. No, timer. I was going to do a timer, but we don't need to do that. I showed you custom hooks. So yeah, hooks are amazing. So just hooks in the wild. You can go and experiment with this stuff. So I actually went and rewrote one of my libraries that technically isn't all public yet, but it's called React Charts. React Charts is just a charting library that I use at Nozzle. I wrote it all on my own because I wanted full control, because I'm selfish. But this is a charting library, and it's hyper responsive, and it's supposed to be as fast as possible. And it had to be fast enough to do really crazy things like render 2,000 data points and keep a high frame rate and synchronize cursors and do all this fancy stuff, right? I could not achieve this performance with the old version because just the patterns that I was given with traditional React were so hard to implement proper memoization and so difficult to understand all of the different lifecycle methods to get this kind of performance. So it's not that hooks are faster in any way, but it's that the patterns that they afford and the tools that they present to us make us think in a more performant way. And when you move over to hooks, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and then you're going to have an epiphany. And you're gonna see how easy it is to be a good developer in React and how difficult it is to make mistakes. That's my opinion. So React Charts is actually in Alpha 2.0. I rewrote it in hooks. You can actually use it in a the current version of React because I backported hooks to React 16.6. That's kind of weird, but I did it because I needed to use React Charts in my code right now, and I know that it's alpha, so I backported hooks into the old React. There's actually a couple of videos I have talking about that, but I hope by now you're at least a little more enlightened, a little more convinced that hooks are great. Actually, where did that go? Let's see. Let's be coded. Hooks touch every part of your app. Everything gets better because of hooks. Your global state is going to change. Forms libraries, caching strategies, and the performance stuff that we just talked about with memoization. CRUD API, GraphQL, all of your data stuff's going to change, and change again with suspense when that comes out. And that's your routing changes, like performance. Everything changes because of hooks. It's a very vertical change, but it's a change for the good. And the React ecosystem is going to change. It's going to be a difficult change, but you're not going to see render props really anymore unless they're just kind of supporting the old way, you know. They're going to be focusing on hooks. You're not going to see HOCs as much, if at all. And it's funny because even the whole JavaScript ecosystem has been influenced by it. Hooks are now in Preact, I believe, and you can even use hooks in Vue. Like the day that they announced hooks, Evan from Vue went and put them into Vue just for fun. And he's like, hey, they work here too. Like, hooks are amazing because it's great. It's a way of doing functional programming with side effects. It's a new paradigm, but it's actually not that new. functional side effects, subscriptions like in RxJS, algebraic effects. Those concepts have been around for a while. As it always is, we're always rediscovering the past and thinking that, oh, this is great. Like, yeah, they thought about this stuff a long time ago, and it's just finally starting to come into the front-end community. So now, you probably thought, okay, view is a function of state. You probably heard that before in React. But up until this point, it's been view as a function or a class or a whatever of state. I believe that we're getting much closer now to view as a function of state. Getting rid of classes is going to clean up a lot of the clutter in the community for teaching and having so many different ways to do things. And classes have been traditionally confusing for people to learn. It's going to be hard for them to migrate over to hooks now, but people coming in and learning React for the first time, I hope that they're going to have a much better experience. It's alpha, so be careful. Don't put it into production. If you really want to put it into production, come talk to me after, and I'll show you my backport, which is highly unstable and probably still not a good idea, but it's fun. It's supposed to come out officially Q1 of next year. So my advice to you would be learn about it, experiment with it, and seriously hold on tight because it's going to take over. Everything is going to be hooks. Whether the React team says it is or not, deep down they know. They know that it's the future. Some very last things before I'm done. I record videos every once in a while in the mornings before work. And I got really excited about hooks, you can see. Hooks. So you can go look at those. Maybe you'll glean some information about that. And definitely go read the hooks API reference at React. Use hooks. And that's my talk. Thanks. And I didn't know if we want to take a few questions if there's time. What was that? Oh yeah, I didn't even show you guys use reducer. Dang. Okay, use reducer. So it's actually funny. Use state, the state hook, runs on use reducer under the hood. It's really cool. But if you ever used Redux, reducer is just a function that takes the old state and an action, and depending on the action, returns the new state. So here's this function that's a reducer that says if the action type is reset, return the initial state. If it's increment, return this state, decrement, and the default is just return the state. And then you use reducer right here. You pass, whoa. That was bad. Reducer. You pass the reducer that's used to update the state, and then you pass the initial state. So now instead of getting the set state that you normally get, you're getting a dispatch. And that dispatch, instead of passing through a function, you pass through just objects, right? Or whatever you want to infer. Traditionally, an action is just an object that at least has a type with some type identifier. So use reducer. Wow. I really want to frame this the right way because I could get in trouble from other thought leaders by saying that use reducer replaces Redux. It doesn't, but it gets really close. Like with all the hooks and stuff, you could easily build your own Redux-y kind of state management system without ever touching Redux. There's still some things that React Redux gives you that you don't get here. But yeah, use reducer. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Use reducer is really cool. You can build your own little Redux with it, basically. Any other questions? Please? I'm just joking. Okay. Yeah, come talk to me after if you want to talk about hooks. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out. 2 pieces of pizza left.